Welcome one and all to the Stock Up Podcast, your one-stop shop for stocking up on the information you need to qualify for the Pro Tour. I am Alex. As always, I'm joined by Jacob. How are you today, sir?
Good. How are you doing, Alex?
I'm all right. This weekend I did not play in the pre-release. I kind of had a weekend to myself, and the new set wasn't on Arena either, so I ended up just playing Final Fantasy Remake all weekend. That's a game I bought a long time ago and just now started playing it.
That's cool.
What did you get up to this weekend?
I went to Orlando, Florida for GCX. My girlfriend Olivia does Magic Kids, so she kind of gets a lot of the way they're paid.
Magic, I'm not familiar.
Yeah, Magic Kids is a charity organization that basically takes card donations or real donations. They take a lot of bulk cards, package them into boxes, and send them to schools across the country to have after-school programs with.
Damn, I would have loved that as a kid.
Yeah, and then so they just donate a bunch of bulk to kids, but then when they get cards that are worth more money or real money, then that's kind of what funds the program. So it works out pretty well.
Nice. And then you told me before, I think you somehow managed to do a pre-release. How'd you do that?
Yeah, so it was like a fundraiser convention for St. Jude stuff, but Cool Stuff Inc. was there running a pre-release, so I played in that just 3 rounds, but had a deck with 2 of the cards on my top 10 list from last week, Nova Hellkite. I had 2 of them in my deck, so.
Whew, spicy.
Yeah.
This year get drilled pretty quick.
Yeah.
So for today's episode, we're going to be discussing Standard. We just got Rotation, and today we got the new cards on Arena. I haven't had a ton of time to play with the new set. Jacob had a little bit of time, more time than me, because he was able to, get early access? Is that what they called it on Arena?
Yeah, like the Wednesday before pre-release, each time a set comes out, they do an early access arena event, and that's usually for content or for streamers more specifically. Since 2025, basically, they've let the Pro Tour players in as per their request. Plus, it seemed like it was kind of a complaint actually from the content creators that these events were kind of taking a little long to fire sometimes. So I think the addition of 350 people or so has probably been nice for everybody.
Yeah, that sounds like a pretty good idea. Probably get a different variety of decks too. Content creators tend to build decks in a certain way sometimes.
Yeah, it's pretty funny for this one though. For the previous 2 Pro Tours, it's made a lot of sense because the Pro Tour has been so close to the set release that the early access feels really valuable. But this one kind of is whatever, the Pro Tour is not till late September, so
it didn't really matter. Yeah. Well, it doesn't hurt.
Yeah, it was still nice. Got in a couple drafts, one 7-win draft, a few that were pretty bad. Still kind of feeling out the set. We're mostly going to talk about Standard today, but I'll just say my early impressions of the format is that black is far and ahead the strongest color in the set.
Like in an unbalanced sort of way?
Yeah, if you draft a lot of Aether Drift, you might have felt that way about green. And I think it's hard to say whether it's more or less balanced than Aether Drift was because it's so early in the set, but that's kind of what I'm expecting is somewhere around there, but with black.
Gotcha. Yeah, I've definitely drafted sets like that where things just stick out very clearly as the best color. So that'll be interesting. I haven't done any drafting yet.
Yeah, I think ultimately color imbalance is kind of unfortunate because Arena Best of 1 is the most popular way to draft, and I think that's where it hurts the most. When you're just playing out of pod, quick Best of 1 games, you're really good, let's say red-white deck in this format, which might be the worst 2 colors, I won't say for sure, is just only going to be at the same power level as an average pod, average black deck, So,
right.
But in pod, at the Pro Tour, that doesn't really bother me or things like that. In pod drafts, I think are actually, it really rewards you when there's color imbalances, and it's pretty self-correcting.
Yeah, my LGS does in pod drafts. We're fortunate enough
too.
to have enough people, so that's pretty cool. And yeah, like you said, it's self-correcting. So if black is really good, that means people know that it's not just the first week or whatever. More people will draft it, and then it can potentially even out.
Yeah, and in Aether Drift, I played a ton of it on Arena, and green was still known as the best color the whole way through. But I'd say by the end of that format, I drafted red more than any other color, just because I felt people were kind of overly drafting green on Arena. So you
Yeah.
kind of get a sense for it on Arena, I'd say, eventually, but it's hard to tell at first. Like, should you be just drafting black, or should you be kind of not avoiding it, but not taking the cards as highly as maybe you normally would?
I'm always torn at the beginning of a new set when it comes out, because it's both the very beginning of a limited format is usually pretty fun because you get to draft better decks than average, is my experience.
Yeah, I drafted a deck today that I haven't played with yet, but it is basically mono black splashing 3 white cards, kind of like I was
Nice.
saying. Just
Yeah, you're like, oh, these are the good ones.
yeah,
Yeah, because usually the more casual drafter that doesn't know the cards quite as well, their card evaluation isn't quite as good, so you can get a higher number of good cards. But then also standard, to me, is pretty interesting right when it rotates, because you get to see people trying all sorts of different things before the
Yeah.
game settles in.
I guess I'll mention this right away. I saw Fire Shoes retweet some events I guess happened over the pre-release weekend. Somebody ran some 5K modern. It was like mod or standard trios rather, which was post rotation.
Oh,
but it's
interesting.
awkward to know how competitive the decks are, given obtaining cards for that event sounds kind of like a nightmare if you wanted new ones. I mean, fortunately, Shocklands are easy to obtain, so nothing really surprising to me in that event. I saw a lot of Gruul aggro, Boros aggro, Dimir, kind of things that would kind of make sense. Nothing that new.
Yeah, mostly, I guess a lot of the decks I have been playing against are just decks from last format where they've added Shocklands or maybe added a color. I played against an Esper deck that was essentially the blue-black mid-range shell, except they had Get Lost, Seam Rip, and Voice of Victory as white cards. And then they had, Kaido and the blue creature, flash creatures, and Curiosity Cat. And so that seemed okay. But things like that, of that nature.
Yeah, today I played against a lot of Naya Yuna. I'm still in a kind of top 500 mythic range right now. I'm trying to see if I can finish the season top 250 for the free qualifier weekend.
It's funny. I assumed it ended today. I'm not sure why. Do you know when it ends?
My guess might actually be like noon tomorrow. But
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know that I'm going to get into the top 250 by then.
Actually, when I logged in today, it said season ends in 2 days. So maybe noon on the 31st. That's my new guess.
Yeah. Well, I've definitely been kind of brewing, so my mythic isn't that high.
Yeah, I've been avoiding the brews just for now, trying to. I mean, the deck I'm playing, we'll get into it later, is Team Marauders, which is sort of a brew, but we can get into that more later. It's kind of an established deck.
Yeah. Let me plug the Patreon really quick. Yeah. So if you all want to support us, you can do so over at patreon.com/StockUpPodcast. At the moment, we have one tier. It's $1 a month. You get access to all the episodes of the podcast, our Discord, as well as all of our exclusive posts by me and Jacob on the Patreon, which now is a good time to get some value out of that. We're going to talk about a couple of the decks that we've been playing. I think Jacob's been playing something. I mostly have just brewed a couple decks. They're rough drafts, and I'm going to talk about those. But over the next week or two, I'm going to be making lots of brews, and I'll make sure to post them all into the Patreon. So
yeah, and I'm still planning on playing in the Laughing Dragon experience in Phoenix in mid-August, which is a standard 20k, and I'm not on a testing team or anything for that, so I don't plan on hiding anything. I'm
awesome.
My deck list the day before.
Yeah, so if you're playing in that, or if you just have a tournament that lines up with the tournament that weekend, you can get Jacob's opinion on standard and see what he's going to play exactly. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And of course, if you don't want to support us on Patreon, that's totally cool. You can watch us on YouTube for free, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. So, let's start a bit from the top here with standard and see what cards are rotating. I've made some graphics for the YouTube channel, and these are just we're gonna go over every color and briefly talk about, some of the things that we find particularly noteworthy that are rotating.
Yeah, and I guess just to be clear, the sets that are rotating are Dominaria United, Brothers War, Phyrexia All Will Be One, March of the Machine, and March of the Machine Aftermath. Pretty much just 4 sets, with Aftermath being like a 30 to 50 card set. But it had some pretty important cards.
Yeah, for sure. So first we'll talk about green. So what cards stick out to you the most in green that are rotating, Jacob?
Yeah, actually not that much, but I see on your list here you have Haywire Might and Tranquil Furlback and Terra Sunder, all kind of pretty good like disenchant effects. I think specifically Haywire Might in combination with like Overlord of the Bailmerk might be missed. The Roots deck obviously really loves Haywire Might, had a ton of ways to kind of dig and find it. And also I guess in the new set there's a white angel that can tutor for a 1-drop, so Haywire Might will probably be missed if there's like a white green deck or something that could have wanted that.
Yeah, and the Gear Hulk too.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Liked being able to get that. I've already built a deck with a Gear Hulk. You can now get Seam Rip, which does some of what you want, but yeah, Haymire White, pretty strong anti. There's been a lot of a push for enchantments lately in Standard, so being able to kill that stuff is nice. There are some good new enchantment removal effects in Standard. There's the Seed Ship. What's it called? I can't remember what it's called, but the one in a green one that.
Yep.
You for an instant you destroy.
But if it costs 2 or less, you get a lander.
Yeah. So there's still going to be good options, but they're going to be different for sure.
Definitely.
And then we could look at white. I have quite a bit more cards listed for white.
Yeah. So luckily, Temporary Lockdown gets sort of a replacement that's different, but we talked about that last week in Pinnacle Stark Age. Leyline Binding is going to really impact, I guess, the Green Overlord's playability. Just blanking on the name right now, but anyways, Unidex, you had that combination in them, and now maybe you had mentioned when I asked you about the Unidex that maybe now Summon Fenrir might even be better than the Green Overlord.
Yeah, it's definitely more of a consideration now. I think before I definitely liked the Overlord, and I'm going to miss having Leyline Binding. It was pretty nice that your Una, if at some point you milled over a binding, you could always just use Una as like a FTK type creature. Yep. That was pretty nice. And I don't really want to put cards like Banishing Light in my deck to be able to do that still. I mean, maybe you can. But yeah, Summon Fenrir, it has the downside of being like a 2 toughness creature in a deck that doesn't typically have small creatures, so you turn on your opponent's small creature removal.
But if you're okay with value every time at least.
Yeah, if you're okay with that sacrifice, then sort of what you're getting instead is you're getting a more of an immediate presence where you can block right away, and then maybe your Fenrir draws a card. I think a lot of the time you will draw a card off of the 3rd chapter if it lives.
Yep. That's how I felt too. It is a little awkward. That deck sometimes has difficulty actually getting the chapter 2 value. Like if you impend a white Overlord right after, it gets a counter, but it doesn't matter really. And another common play I see the turn after. I mean, it'd be nice if you could play Una and get an enchantment, but that's not usually what happens. I see people, also like Flashback Esper Origins, which doesn't get a counter, unfortunately, either.
Right. And, we've talked about it before, but I still think the Green Overlord definitely has its benefits. It turns into a pretty big creature. And then if you ever cast it for 5 mana or bring it back with Una, it's much better than the Fenrir,
definitely.
Obviously.
I think the big appeal maybe to the Summon Fenrir to me is if you wanted to include the Black Overlord and wanted more hits.
Yeah, that's a pretty good point.
If you're looking at an Abzan deck.
If you have enough creatures, yeah.
Yeah.
I did brew, well, not even hardly brewed. I took my Abzan Unideck from last format and changed around some cards.
Yeah.
And I'll show that a little bit later. But it would be interesting. You would have to change it around quite a bit more to fit in the Black Overlord, but that's something you could do. What other cards in white do you think are going to be sorely missed?
We'll just point out, and I don't mean this because of your old graphic, I just mean in general because it's not obvious, that Elspeth's Smite is actually not rotating despite being a March of the Machine card. It is kind of in Foundation secretly. And that's
that's a good point. I missed that originally.
And then Lay Down Arms is a card that the mono white deck has been playing. I'll get into this later, but I think that deck can splash red or black pretty easily, which both of those colors will offer a lot of removal. It's also getting Seam Rip. But because Lay Down Arms is rotating, it also has almost no reason to be mono white. I think this deck could splash red or black, not both, and still maintain playing 4 Fountain Boards, for example.
Yeah. So all these cards, it's interesting to note that they're leaving, but honestly, Leyline Binding, I guess, is really the only super meaningful one. I've
been splashing white in the sideboard of my landfall decks, and the only card here that's rotating is my one Elesh Norn, so it won't really matter that much.
Yeah. Moving on to black, this might be the most impactful change outside of the lands, I would say.
Yeah.
What do you see in black?
Cut down and Go for the Throat are the big ones here. But also, Sheoldred's Edict and Anoint with Affliction are cards I've been seeing play. Is these other kind of flex slot ones. But in general, we're really narrowing down the black removal options, I think. And all of a sudden, we're looking at Shoot the Sheriff, which might mean you're really going to start caring about what cards are outlaws or not. Because, in kind of the same way people would often sometimes play some artifact creatures, maybe to dodge Go for the Throat. Now I think Shoot the Sheriff is the card where that's going to be the case more so. Beyond that, there's some threats. Shieldred and Archfiend of the Dross have kind of been a little pushed out of the format recently, but they've had their moments every now and then. They have a good weekend every now and then, and now that's, not a thing anymore.
Yeah. I was happy with Blot Out last format. It was kind of a unique thing for the slower and more controlling black decks I was building, where it answered things very nicely, having an Edict against mono green or Yuna, Kaito.
Yeah, it's a good answer to both Kaito and Enduring Curiosity.
Yeah, and looking at the black removal now, there's not a ton of things that exile in black anymore. Even I liked playing Anoint too, because it exiled cards which mattered against Cauldron. It mattered against the white Enduring creature, and then Blot Out got the blue Enduring creature. So
yep.
Enduring creatures might get a bit better. They still have to worry about Torch the Tower, but black doesn't have much exile anymore. So going on to our next color here, we've got our red rotating cards.
Yeah, so Lithomantic Barrage, has only really been a sideboard card, but it's been pretty impactful. It's hits Kaido, and it's had its moments in weird spots too, where it doesn't have to only work against white or blue creatures, but it's also been nice that you could board it in versus a Jeskai control deck or something and hit Beza and Shiko, but also if they had a random Planeswalker, maybe that, and just for 1 mana it can't be countered. Also, the occasional ward things have mattered. Like, for example, the card Sheltered by Ghosts, which isn't rotating, has been in a lot of decks with white creatures, and it's been really bad. I'd say Lithomantic Barrage has been a big part of why it's really bad, though Into the Flood mod also has made that card pretty bad.
How do you... So, one of the stronger decks going forward, I think, is going to be the Cauldron deck. How do you think that deck does when it's missing Voldaren Thrillseeker?
Yeah, so that's an important thing to touch on. I think most of the time it's going to feel the same, but there might be some key matchups where it doesn't. Because what Thrillseeker does better than any other card in that deck is allow you to win specifically post-combat with summoning sick creatures. Post-combat matters a lot here because of how Proph's Eidetic Memory works, where you could get a lot of counters on a creature. Maybe a creature didn't even have counters, so all of a sudden it's now another VV activation for a ton of mana in your second main phase, and you could keep going through your deck. And, that kind of fling ability, there's not really a replacement for that. There's, Draconautics Engineer can give things haste, but that's still a pre-combat thing. And then there's a new, I'm forgetting the name of it. I just saw it today in a deck list. Let me see if I can find it. It's a 1-mana 1/1 artifact creature from the new set. And you can pay, it's in my pre-release deck too, you can pay 2 and tap it and exile an artifact from your graveyard to have a creature get a counter, or have it get a counter and deal damage equal to its power to any target.
Rust Harvester, I think.
Rust Harvester, yeah, that is what it's called. So
yeah, 1/1 menace. That's a nice one.
That, in combination with another artifact in your graveyard, which could just be another Cauldron you discard along the way, I think you could kind of simulate what I'm talking about. The only problem is you'd still need an untapped creature with haste, or without Summoning Sickness. That could maybe be done with a Tersa, but that's kind of now a way you could fling that I didn't think about till I saw it earlier today, actually.
Is the fling really important? Could you not just play the Engineer that gives your guys haste and makes a dragon and whatnot that people already play in the sideboard?
I just think that kind of, you actually lose out on a ton of kills, and in most matchups, like if you're playing against an aggro deck or Dimir mid-range, when you have this absurd Cauldron turn with your VV and stuff, you don't need to win the game. That doesn't matter. What matters is when you're against a deck with a sweeper, like Control or the mono white deck or something like that, where I think your deck was really good against those decks because you pretty reliably could just kill them later in the game if they tapped out. And now you might be missing, you're still going to win a lot of the time that they tap out in those spots, but I think it'll happen significantly less than it did before, and that might give them another turn to stabilize or answer your Cauldron or things like that.
Gotcha. That makes sense. That'll be interesting to see what people can replace it with.
That deck's also losing, was it Shivan Reef? I mean, it can play Starting Town, I guess, but not
some lands. Yeah, it's interesting. Some decks will have an option of playing a third color and maybe even making their mana more stable, but we'll talk about that in a second. Gleeful Demolition. That
That's
kind of kills that. I don't even know what you call it.
the Convoke
That
deck, but I mean, Knight Aaron of Eos is also leaving, but
Oh,
yeah,
gotcha. Yeah, so that deck's not really gonna be in one piece.
yeah, there
And that
might be another tokens deck, but it's not going to be the same.
the other thing I see here is Monastery Swiftspear from Secret Standard is leaving. That sometimes saw play. And then Urbrass Forge. I think that leaving might improve a lot of arena players' win rate. I'll tell you what. The card
Yeah,
is
people.
very popular on the ladder, and I don't think it's very good.
Yeah,
And let's see. What color do we have to talk about? Oh, blue.
blue. Yeah.
Yeah, what do you see in blue that's missing?
I mean, Fairy Mastermind is one of the better cards against the Cauldron deck. It was part of why I started playing the Dimir deck, in fact. So the fact that the Dimir deck can no longer play that card is a pretty big nerf to it in combination with the black mid-range things. You know, I think a lot of people with this kind of outro standard were pretty worried about the Dimir deck, but I think it's got a pretty significant kind of hit to its mana base, and also it's, I guess, not a big hit to its mana base, but it's losing 8 good lands and only getting Watery Grave. So
that's a hit, and then also a big hit is the removal to that deck. I think
yeah, the
it
removal will
relies
be the
on
biggest
efficient
hit.
removal.
Yeah.
Also in blue, I think Change the Equation was a card I still like to play a lot.
Yeah.
Towards the end of the format, I was using it because I didn't like putting 3 steps ahead in my deck, and I kept playing against control decks that had like 4 3 steps ahead. I started putting Change the Equation in my main deck so I could win a counter war.
Yep.
Against that.
Yep.
And then Jace the Perfected Mind was a card people were leaning on.
Another card that might improve arena players' win rates.
Oh yeah, for
now that it
sure.
rotates.
Yeah, they loved that card.
I think I've
and
mentioned this
hated it.
before, but you know, on arena, I would just play decks so often that I felt like Jace was really bad against, because you would just play against these control decks and they would just have multiple copies of Jace in their main deck like reliably. And this is in Mythic. It's just these players just love them.
Yeah.
And when you play these
I
long
really
control
don't get
mirrors,
it.
especially in a closed deckless format, I would just lose on turn 8 to my opponent playing 2 Jaces and milling me 30 cards all the time. Like, and it's just like I you know, it's,
Yeah. And then you put the Jace in your deck, and you get paired against blue-black mid-range, and you have this card, and you're just like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
yeah, exactly.
Why couldn't
Anybody
this
that
be
plays a
stock
creature on
up or
turn
whatever,
1
anything
and
else?
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then the last section I have here is some colorless and multicolor cards.
Yeah, so I mean, Atraxa, you know, is one of the best things to cheat in or reanimate of all time, so that'll be missed. Zur has really been annoying with the Overlords. I've even seen some kind of Zur Unidecks after the Beans ban, so that's no longer an option. It's purely a Unideck now. Still in Brain Ban, once again, increasing players' win rates, I'm sure. In those same control mirrors that I've lost game 1 to multiple Jaces, I've had my opponents stone brain me and just name like Stock Up or something totally nonsensical.
I had a mono white deck play that on turn 2 and then activate it on turn 3 against me, naming Jace the Perfected Mind against my blue-black control deck. It was so nice.
Yeah. Positive Heroes is a card I thought, you know, was really, really strong, but pretty much since the Channel Lands have rotated a year ago, it hasn't seen any play at all.
Right. Blast Zone is a card I'm going to miss. I liked using that to destroy people's artifacts and whatnot. But okay, and then, of course, the most noteworthy thing, of course, is the lands. So all the the 5 fast lands, the Seacrum Coast, Blackleaf Cliffs, Darkslick Shores, Copperland Gorge, and Razorverge Thicket are all rotating, and then every Pain land is rotating. Of course, we are getting the Shock lands. So in general, what are mana bases going to look like, you think, in Standard going forward?
Yeah, so I have some notes about this. The Shock lands that we're getting are not any sort of notable pattern to them. They're just kind of 5 random ones. Watery Grave, Breeding Pool, Stomping Grounds, Sacred Foundry, and Godless Shrine. And, you know, losing 10 Pain lands affects kind of all decks equally, or at least all color combinations. And then losing the allied fast lands only really impacts those color combinations. So we have some weird things where, you know, Selesnya, Hollowed Fountain, Selesnya, Azorius, and Rakdos are kind of left behind here because they're losing 2 lands each and getting no lands in return. And then Boros, Orzhov and Simic are kind of ahead because they're only losing a pain land, but they're getting a shock land. And then some of the other color combinations are kind of at a wash here, where they lose a land, but they gain a land.
Right. And then, of course, there's certain wedges also, 3 colors that get two shock lands.
Yeah, so the wedges and shards that get 2 shock lands each are Naya, Mardu, Esper, Sultai, and Temur. Notably, the wedges, which are the ones that are kind of the cons color combos, they are at a slight advantage because they have an extra fast land in each of them, compared to the shards from Shards of Alara, which are Esper and Naya in this case. And then also kind of the way the verges work matters a little, but you can usually make that balance it out. It matters more in like deck building, which might be what turns things to a viable deck. So like notably Sultai is getting 2 shock lands here, Breeding Pool and Watery Grave, which are both islands, and then it's also has a blue-green verge as blue first and a blue-black verge as blue first. So that's a deck that could maybe play 3 steps ahead or something. And in fact, I think I saw Shahar streaming on the early access. He's kind of had this Temur surprise deck. He now has a Sultai surprise deck, maybe because of that mana base.
Okay. That's interesting. So the early double pips are going to be more likely in case you don't have that basic land type and your verge is just hitting half.
Yeah, maybe
it also matters.
Bargain, which would be kind of nice in combination.
Right. Playing 1-drops in your deck matters a lot too. With the verges. Things like Llanowar Elves can be played off of the green-black verge on turn 1, but it can't be played off of the blue-green verge.
Exactly.
Turn 1, things like that.
Yep. The Mardu mana also, both its shock lands are white, and the black-white verge is black first, the white-red verge is white first, and the red-black verge is also black first. So I don't know, that would maybe be like a white-black deck splashing red, I guess, hypothetically. It doesn't have a lot of turn 1 red sources, but it could pretty reliably have red later in the game once your verges are online. Just stuff like that you'd want to keep in mind while building your deck.
Yeah, totally. And the fast lands matter for 1-drops and whatnot. Like you said, you can kind of build around it if you really want to build a color combination and the verges aren't cooperating perfectly. It's not the end of the world. You could just play more of the other lands.
Yeah, you could build mana bases without many verges at all, and it would still kind of work out.
Right. Lands in comparison to the tap lands that Surveil, what do you think the sort of numbers people are going to play? Are they going to max out on shocklands first before they play any surveils?
I would think you should max out on shocklands first. The surveil lands are they're pretty powerful. They're going to be more powerful in decks without 1-drops, because turn 1's kind of the best time to play them, and then late game it's nice to have. The surveil is more powerful later in the game, but easier to squeeze in early in the game, so it's kind of an interesting dynamic of them in general. But yeah, I think the shocklands are just the best lands in Standard. It's my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. The more likely your deck is to put shocklands into play tapped, the more you're going to want the surveil lands, I think. So if you're playing a slower deck, you might play more surveil lands than, well, maybe more than 0. You might play 1 or 2 and maybe not max out on your shock of that color, like especially if you have 2 shocks in your deck.
Yeah, right now with the color imbalance, I would just kind of think, taking Jeskai Control, for example, I mean, that's a weird combo because it only gets Sacred Foundry, but I would put 4 Sacred Foundry in that deck and just maybe still play a similar number of Surveil lands, just less elegant Parlor.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. Maybe Esper.
Yeah, that's maybe a better example.
Esper maybe would not play 8 shocklands. Kind of have to look at the mana base. I think
I would just think you would maybe not change your number of surveil lands and simply cut other lands for shock lands.
I see, like verges.
Yeah.
The verges get a lot better if there's less of them, oddly enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Another interesting thing that's going to be going on is since black is losing so much good removal, it's probably not the default best color for removal in Standard at the moment. What other sort of removal spells and other colors do you like?
So, looking at some of the other colors, so, white just got Seam Rip, and they've had Get Lost. They still have Elspeth Smite, which might be relevant if there's a lot of aggro, and that's also, like, a way that can exile Enduring Curiosity, though kind of unreliably, especially if you're playing best of 3 or open deckless tournaments. Your opponent might not attack with that card. But yeah, I think Get Lost is really interesting because, it does the best job of hitting a lot of stuff. And, for example, it's been kind of a draw to white for me when I am choosing a second color to splash in my green aggro landfall decks I try out. And that's because it's just the most catch-all of all the removal spells, and I care a little bit less about giving my opponents maps when this is purely a sideboard card. But as a main deck card, those maps really add up. Fortunately, I guess, this is somewhat relevant. Pinnacle Starcage still hits artifacts, so you can clean up the maps at some points. You'd think that's kind of a joke, but it happens all the time with Temporary Lockdown, and it's still going to happen with Starcage.
Oh yeah, the maps, in my experience, are a pretty big deal, especially against the kind of decks where Lockdown or Pinnacle Stargate is good against. They usually can make pretty good use of the map, so it's a pretty big downside, and it's nice to be able to clean those up.
Yeah, I mean, I played, Gruul at the Pro Tour, and let me tell you about how good maps are with Emberheart Challenger. That's the draw card.
Yikes,
it's better than draw card,
I boarded out Get Lost against decks like that. It's rough.
Yeah. So yeah, white's got some good ones. Really, red I think is the big standout here. We've got tons of removal here, but the big ones I've named here are Torch the Tower, Abrade, Obliterating Bolt, which also secretly doesn't rotate because of Foundations, Fire Magic, and Twin Moth Stormbrood, which I put as mono red because I don't think the Dragon half is really that important here.
Right.
Just a lot of flexibility here. I have Fire Magic here, which we've talked about this card plenty, but really you don't have to view this card as a sweeper. It's just you're playing it because it's a sweeper, but when it costs 1 mana and can kill X1s, it's just potentially even a main deckable card at that role. And once you play against a deck that has a decent amount of X1s, you're boarding this in because you can kill Llanowar Elves on turn 1 with this. But then later in the game, you can kill multiple creatures with it potentially.
Yeah, totally. I agree with red looking pretty good. Probably you're gonna pair it with another color a lot of the time to try to mitigate its downside of not being able to kill the biggest of creatures. With Roast being able, you could kill a 5 toughness thing, I guess, a non-flyer. But there are certain things.
Mono red has Scorching Shot too, so they could hit flyers too if they wanted. But yeah, I mostly think playing 2 colors is going to be kind of free. I don't know what the incentive would be to be mono red anymore, especially because they banned Heartfire Heroes, so your 1-drops are maybe even kind of lacking, and you might want to look to another color anyways. Also, Swiftspear's rotating. I'm sure there might still be a good mono red deck, but I've been looking a little bit at just like a Boros aggro deck. Just kind of, and an aggro deck is kind of one that might be able to use Get Lost a little bit better too, because your opponent might not have time to use their maps.
For sure. But what kind of cards do you use in the Boros aggro deck? I'm curious.
I was just looking at mice, to be honest, to start.
Okay.
Just you can
do you
play
like the 1-drop
the Flower
Mouse
with Offspring. I think Mabel's a pretty strong card. Getting the less so because it's a Mouse Lord, but more because the legendary equipment token is pretty powerful.
I always liked that card too.
When I see that red is looking pretty strong, it makes me somewhat interested in playing with Screaming Nemesis. Just it's been quite the mirror breaker in red mirrors, and also kind of a cool combo I've been thinking about more, maybe not to main deck, is Fire Magic is pretty good with Screaming Nemesis. You have a lot more flexibility there. And I don't mean it in like the blasphemous act, deal 13 to your Screaming Nemesis and shoot your opponent in the face way. I just mean that, like if you have a Nemesis, you could play a Fire Magic for 1 and still kill a 2 toughness creature, among other things.
Right, or play it for 3 and then kill a 4 toughness creature.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's just a lot of flexibility. I think those cards will play really well together.
Yeah, I do think Screaming Nemesis is easily one of the best red cards in Standard, and you could probably even put it in decks that aren't just strictly mono red beatdown.
Yeah, I agree. I think you could be kind of a more mid-rangey deck and it would play out totally fine. But yeah, it's also having haste is nice because even against removal, I found the floor of the card is just pretty high. People talked about it being bad versus nowhere to run or whatever, but so often you could just maneuver these games to you get the attack in with it and it does 3 damage before it dies at least. It's really not hard.
Totally, yeah. And if red's going to be one of the best colors for removal in Standard, red removal's not very good against it, so that's always nice.
Yeah, in red mirrors, we've joked that at PT teams that it's basically True Name Nemesis, which is just funny because it has Nemesis in the name, but like your opponent just never blocks it and they never use removal on it. and they
Right.
can't attack. If you leave it on tap, they can't attack you either. It's just like it's very similar.
Yeah. Blue for removal is basically just going to have, a handful of counter spells, and then I guess Into the Flood Maw you could sort of consider in that spot.
Yeah, I've heard some people say some weird comments about Into the Flood Maw, kind of complaints about it. Let me just say, so this card is not, like Swords to Plowshare or whatever. It is card disadvantage. The reason it's seeing so much play, honestly, I think is because of Stock Up and cards similar to it, where you just have these pretty great card advantage spells. So trading 1 mana for a lot of your opponent's mana, but going down a card is kind of exactly what you're looking for.
What are the comments about it?
Oh, just people complaining that like they can't play cards that cost 4 or more without ETBs because they just get bounced, which is like sort of true, but I think that's not really Into the Flood Maw's fault. I think that's blue card advantage's fault.
Yeah, I mean that's also just sort of constructed magic, right?
Yeah.
I mean that also happens with other types of removal.
And then I'll just also add Unable to Scream is a decent like blue sideboard option that's seen some main deck play. It does a good job against certain types of creatures.
Yeah, totally. I'll speak on the counter spells a little bit. So at the moment there's Dispelling Exhale.
Yep.
That's the dragon counter spell. That's 2 or 4 if you reveal or control a dragon. There's No More Lies, which obviously costs white also. And then it's kind of slim pickings from there. Blue, there's a couple other counter unless you pay 2 things. There's the fairy card. If you play with fairies, so blue-black midrange obviously use that card.
Yep.
And there's Syncopate, which I think you could use Syncopate. Dispelling Exhale is like mostly better, I think, if you can fit dragons in your deck, especially since a lot of the blue decks that wanted a counterspell like that would also be happy to play Meringue River Regent. But now that there's the star charts, consult the star charts, I think that's going to be a pretty strong card that you're going to be tempted to play in blue.
Yep.
And it's a little bit hard to play that with Meringue and presumably Stock Up. So you might want to move away from the dragon. I've considered building decks, for instance, where I don't play the dragon anymore, and then I'm kind of looking at, maybe I use Syncopate, maybe I'm relying on the 3 mana counters. We have 3 Steps Ahead, and then the new one, Unravel, which is a cancel, but you draw a card if the card has a convert mana, the card that you counter has a convert mana cost higher than the mana your opponent spent on it. So like the
mana,
Overlords.
basically.
Yeah.
So, there's some weird things too, right? It would no, I think Omen's mana value is the actual card, like
I think it's just
Omen.
the spell. Yeah, I don't think it works.
So that doesn't work against Omens.
It's basically just Overlords at the moment.
Yeah, maybe
probably some other niche cards that I can't think of.
That sounds right.
So that's okay. And 3 Steps Ahead in theory can be a strong card in the right metagame. I think in general I'm not very happy to start with 3 mana counters or even 3 mana removal in standard these days. I think people's threats are just generally too cheap and too effective to rely on those sorts of cards.
Yeah, I agree. And passing with 3 mana can just be a nightmare sometimes. But, a card like Rakshas's Bargain, if you do find a Sultai control deck or something, that would go a long way in making 3 Steps Ahead more playable.
Yeah, for sure. And if you're playing a draw-go game with Into the Star Charts and you're going to be leaving at 4 mana anyways, you can do that. Or even, that kind of makes Syncopate better too, since if you have to Syncopate something for 3, you kind of have the mana up anyways. It's not like if you had played 3 Steps Ahead that you would have used that 1 extra mana.
Yeah, that's fair.
And then green almost got Green Murder, but I guess they're not going to have it.
Yeah, green, I wrote down a few things, not because I think they're better than other removal spells on this list, but if you happen to be playing mono green landfall or green, I think some cards that stand out to me are Archdruid's Charm, which is the triple green card that one of the modes is put a counter on something and it does damage with its power to another creature or planeswalker, I believe. But it's also kind of like a land creature tutor. It can exile an artifact or enchantment. So it's a pretty versatile card if you can cast it, to be honest. The other card I see every now and then is Hunter's Talent, which is kind of weird. It's the talent from Bloomburrow that Chapter 1 is when it enters, target creature you control does damage equal to its power to target creature opponent's controls, and as you level it, it becomes like a give a thing +1/+0 and trample when it attacks, and then if you like end step control a creature power 4 greater, you draw a card. That was just in my mind because I played a lot of Bloomburrow Draft, and that was like the strongest possible pack one pick one in my opinion in the format.
Yeah, that card's really not too bad. Obviously you wouldn't play it if in other colors, but if you're mono green or maybe if you're green red and you need to kill something big,
Yep.
you also get the card advantage aspect to it. So, or the additional attack or whatever. So
Yeah, or if you can
it's actually a pretty strong
bounce
card.
it. There's some applications there as well.
Yeah. So, and then of course there's black, which loses a lot of good removal. So we're kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel. What cards have you found that you think people might put in their black decks for removal?
Yeah, so Shoot the Sheriff's the big one. Notably, the non-outlaw clause does matter. One of the biggest ones you're going to run into, and why I haven't played this card in the past, like a split with Go for the Throat, is Soulstone Sanctuary. Just always an outlaw.
Yeah, that's a pretty big deal. There's also outlaws pretty encompassing. Like there's actually quite a few cards you wouldn't expect to be outlaws that
Hired Claw comes to mind. But yeah, there's a lot.
So I would say it's much worse than Go for the Throat.
Yeah, I would as well. I guess to add to that, kind of in a shared category, I have Feed the Cycle and Bitter Triumph. Feed the Cycle is the one in the black, destroy target creature or planeswalker instant, but you either have to forage or pay an additional black. So I think, you could maybe in a black mid-range deck, especially if you can produce double black pretty consistently, play the first copy of this without really caring about that clause and either have 3 cards in your graveyard or have the extra mana when you need it. But I think, you really, if you're going to play multiple copies of this card, you really need to be like playing Overlord of the Bellmark or something that's milling yourself at the very least. And then similarly, Bitter Triumph, you can't just be paying 3 life for discarding cards all the time. You really need to actively wanting to be discarding a card being a Reanimator deck. But, that's a potential payoff to being a Reanimator deck.
Yeah, the Feed the Cycle card, I've been playing a little bit just to try it, particularly in blue-black control where I want answers to planeswalkers. And it's been okay there. I will say, it's cost 2 mana more of the time than I would have expected.
Yep. It just doesn't on turn 2 is the big issue with the card.
Yeah, it is an issue for sure. And I think, it's kind of narrow in that you really want to be a slower black deck to play it. I don't think like a deck like blue-black mid-range, I don't think is going to play it.
Yeah, also I guess if there's incidental food tokens, that's another way to discount that card. But
yeah, it is. Or maybe if you're self-milling, that sort of thing. But that card's okay.
Yeah, the card people are saying is the cut-down replacement, which I'm not a big believer in, is Tragic Trajectory from Edge of Eternities. It's a black sorcery, 1 mana. Target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn and has Void, so that creature gets -10/-10 until end of turn instead if a non-land permanent left the battlefield this turn or a spell was warped this turn. Being a sorcery is a big deal. If this card is an instant, I'd kind of be right there with them, especially because a non-land permanent leaving the battlefield, having it being an instant would give you a lot more opportunity for that to be true. Including your own end step, let alone your opponent's entire turn.
Yeah, in my mind, this card is a playable card if you can reliably trigger it with like maybe you're playing a sacrifice deck, that sort of thing, or you have some cheap artifacts to sack, maybe maps.
Yeah,
but
speaking of being a sack deck, some other cards in that category are, I wrote down, there's a lot, but I wrote down Final Vengeance, which is the Duskmourn version of this card, which lets you sack a creature and enchantment as an additional cost. You have to. It's a single black sorcery. It's like exile target creature or planeswalker. There's a new one that lets you sack an artifact or creature, and it's destroy target creature or spacecraft. Unfortunately, not artifact. When you have the sack fodder and you're like one of these Sephiroth decks or something, or the Final Vengeance card I've played with Disturbing Mirth specifically in a red-black deck, these do their job pretty well. Exile matters against the cat as well, or other enduring cards.
Yeah, so I mean, even those may be better than the Trajectory. I think in my mind, those go in the same sort of decks. I think Trajectory, if people are just going to play a deck like blue-black mid-range and just swap it in for cut down, I think they'll be pretty disappointed overall and probably won't continue to do that.
Yeah, I'm wrong. Final Vengeance can't hit planeswalkers, unfortunately, but it does exile. And also sacking a creature or enchantment, those small things matter a lot.
Gotcha. I think there's a variant of that card that does hit planeswalkers.
Yeah, there's so many. There's almost one in every set in Standard, so I'm sure you might be able to find one that meets your needs if you're playing.
Yeah.
But yeah,
luckily there's not a ton of good planeswalkers. Yeah, for sure. The Sephiroth decks have a reason to exist after after rotation for sure. They've got some new tools with that 2 mana 3/2, the Umbral, what's his name, that lets you sack unconditionally.
Yep.
And there's some other cool black tools from the new set.
Yeah, and like I mentioned, black white mana is pretty good. Basically better than before. It lost Caves of Koilos and got Godless Shrine, and also you could potentially stretch that into Mardu, I think, as well.
Yeah, that is pretty good. What do you think about Arch Enemy's Charm? It's another new card that fits the criteria of black removal. So I'll read it really quick. Black, instant. Choose 1. Exile target creature or planeswalker. Return one or two target creature and or planeswalker cards from your graveyard to your hand, or put 2+1/+1 counters on target creature you control against lifelink until end of turn.
Yeah, I saw some mono black aggro decks from the streamers in the early access event where this card was really shining, I guess. Just, playing to the board earlier makes your removal spell costing 3, but being basically unconditional and exiling, not feel as bad because it costs 3. Plus, you get the combat trick mode out of it a lot more often.
Yeah, that seems about where you would want to play it, I think. I can't think of another use for it.
Yeah. There's kind of an issue. I keep building these, not building to play, but just kind of shelling out these ideas for these one-color aggro decks. And I just think red is so good, and Fire Magic is such a good sideboard card. And Fire Magic is absurd against so many of these decks that are just playing, multiple one-drop X1 creatures, like 8 copies and things like that, including the Sephiroth deck.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I mean, there's still the lockdown problem too, essentially.
Yeah.
Seam Rip is another good new card that is going to give white decks the ability to keep on par with your 1-drops.
Yep.
The Fire Magic's a good point. I have seen people build mono black decks and have boards where they have like 5 creatures in play and 4 of them die to a 1-mana Fire Magic.
Yeah. No, I had some white decks that look the same.
Yeah. So that's a little rough.
White deck, I guess at least I'm trying to play the new station that can pump them all. But if you don't draw that, then also if you draw it, they can still play 3 mana and get rid of your old board.
Yeah. It's interesting. We might be moving into a mid-range sort of world. We came out of a format that was very fast, but after they've banned so many of the good cheap cards, and then they've printed quite a bit of anti-aggro stuff, so it's possible this format's going to be quite a bit slower than the last one, I would say. We'll have to see.
So, So just to end, I guess, the removal list I had, I just have some gold cards. Molten Collapse. Kind of awkward because I mentioned Rakdos has pretty terrible mana, worse than, I'd say, Sultai even.
Is that the sorcery terminate thing?
Yeah, so it's a red and a black, and choose one, or if you descended this turn, you may choose both. You descended if a permanent card was put into a graveyard from anywhere. Destroy target creature or planeswalker, or destroy target non-creature, non-land permanent of mana value 1 or less. So, just kind of versatile, and sometimes can get some value in these decks. I don't know exactly what non-creature, non-permanents of mana value 1 or less that come to mind. I guess you can keep them from getting value from Storm Chaser's talent, for example, by getting that out of the way. That, doesn't feel so bad if you're also killing a BV or something like that. But, just kind of like that. Lightning Helix, more obvious, been a staple of Jeskai control recently. But, tagging on 3 life matters a lot on that type of card, especially if we're seeing a lot of red decks that are going to be a little bit more damage focused. Lastly, Disruptive Stormbrood, which I didn't include as a mono black card because I think you really need to be black-green to want to play this card. That is the green dragon with the black omen. The omen is 1 in a black sorcery, destroy target creature with power 3 or less. And the dragon is 4 in a green for 3/3 flying, and when it enters, it destroys an artifact or enchantment. So, that's just like a pretty versatile card. I've seen it in decks pretty often that are Golgari. And I think it plays out pretty well in those decks, actually. The 2-mana sorcery is not amazing, but it does a good job of killing a lot of stuff in the format, combined with the fact that, you can kill a Pinnacle Starcage with this, or a Seam Rip, or things like that against the control deck.
Yeah, I've thought that card is pretty good. You definitely have to be playing both. A big part of it is, again, I keep saying, enchantments and artifacts are kind of pushed nowadays, and just being able to answer them at all in general is kind of important, especially for slower decks. So getting up this big Reclamation Sage on the other half of your card is pretty nice.
Yeah, I guess also a dragon if you happen to be caring about that with your cards.
Sure. Speaking of dragons, I'll mention lastly here, the Black Exhale is pretty good. That's the 1 black -3/-3. Costs 1 more if you don't reveal or control a dragon, but you know, obviously some pretty narrow application, but if you are going to commit to dragons, it's a pretty efficient card.
Yeah, that makes sense.
If you're just paying 1 mana.
But
So-
yeah, red I think is really far ahead. Torch the Tower and Fire Magic I think are both really, really good. Abrades might also have a big premium if the Cauldron deck is what a lot of people are playing right now.
Yeah, so the Cauldron deck is probably one of the big front runners, I would say, because it doesn't lose a ton, although it does lose some significant things, as Jacob pointed out. What other sorts of decks do you think are the obvious front runners? Maybe not brews, but maybe even just already existing decks that get some upgrades or whatnot.
Yeah, so I guess I'll get into the deck I've been playing today, and that is Temur Otters.
Nice.
This is kind of interesting because this is a deck that was developed by Sanctum of All, a team at Worlds last year. So effectively, this is a Temur deck that uses Enduring Vitality alongside card advantage and removal and usually Storm Chaser's Talent, Thunder Trap Trainer, and then kind of the combo cards here are Valley Floodcaller and Song of Totenaz. So I guess Song of Totenaz is the red X sorcery from Wilds of Eldraine that makes X 1/1 black rat tokens that can't block, and creatures you control gain haste until end of turn. Valley Floodcaller is the 3-mana 2/2 Flash Otter from Bloomburrow that gives all your non-creature spells flash, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you untap all of your it's rats and otters and I think birds and what's the last one? Frogs, and gives them +1/+1 until end of turn. So, you know, kind of nice that the song is rats. Effectively, what you can assemble here is if you have the Enduring Vitality and the Floodcaller and you play the song, or, you know, already have these rats, your non-creature spells untap a lot of your creatures that can tap for mana and pump them, and you just cast some card draw and kill your opponent. It's surprisingly good at doing that, I guess I would say. This deck also has Analyze the Pollen, which is a nice creature tutor that can find either Floodcaller or Vitality, and then some other bullets in the deck, such as Twin Moss Stormbrood and Questing Druid for some card advantage. It's been pretty effective, and this deck also in the Arena Qualifier weekend that I played in a couple weeks ago, I believe creator of it, Ray Zhang, also known as CFT Sock pretty well, qualified playing this deck. And I took their list and noticed the only things that rotated were some sideboard Lithomantic Barrages and some of the lands, and in exchange, we got 4 Breeding Pool and 4 Stomping Ground, which I think are literally the best 8 lands in the deck now.
Nice. So the big changes here are the shock lands and then consult the star charts.
Yeah, I had to consult the star charts over 2 main deck Ral, but there was 2 main deck Ral Crackling Whip before, basically, and that was basically the deck. There's some flex spots with the removal, a Braid I leaned a little bit more towards right now. And yeah, nice. This is, I guess, like a combo control deck is how I'd put it. I am in a Discord with Ray, so I would say from them that they don't really like their aggro matchups, and they really, really like their non-aggro matchups. And I think Dimir is kind of in between, and Cauldron is maybe kind of on the less favorable side, to be honest. But, you know, you have a lot of play to your deck, and I definitely think against like a control deck or something like this, it's very, very good. I've beat up on a lot of unit decks too. Like I said, when your opponent's not pressuring you, you find your combo, and your combo is actually pretty hard to interact with. You know, Enduring Vitality is an enduring card, so that's already really annoying. This is general the format across many decks potentially, but this one's kind of the one really exploiting it. Torch the Tower, you can cast and bargain, targeting your own enduring creature and bargaining it. You won't scry one if this happens, but it means that if your opponent tries to like exile your Enduring Vitality, you can effectively just pay red mana to sack it.
Yeah, that's pretty nice.
Yeah, so even against a control deck, like your kind of what you might think is your worst card in Torch the Tower is actually like a dive down almost, you know?
Yeah. It's funny how good Torch the Tower is, isn't it?
Yeah.
I had a game where I was playing against Naya Yuna, and they played I was tapped out completely. They played a red Overlord, put me to 1, and then they had Yuna in play. So the red Overlord was they just played it for 4 mana, and they like Torch the Towered one of my guys, and then at the end step brought back like a Summon Fenrir, and I was at 1. And I just realized that they could have bargained their own thing.
Yep.
and it brought it back again during the end step to have done 8 direct damage to me. So it has all sorts of applications. It's a pretty crazy card for just being 1 mana. So definitely a one to look out for it for playing red. I mean, probably every red deck's just gonna play it, so maybe that's kind of obvious. But
Burst Lightning's still in standard too, so people definitely, when they're more aggressive, really like playing Burst Lightning. But yeah, I don't know. I found, this was a question that came up back when I played Gruul Mice. And I guess once Domain kind of took over at the PT, some people wished they'd played Burst Lightning. But, people just register Enduring Curiosity so often. And you play these games as Gruul Mice where you don't even have that much sack fodder. And then, you're just like pretty ahead on board and it's turn 4 and your opponent flashes in the Enduring Curiosity mid-combat, and you just sack your Innkeeper's Talent and exile it for 1 mana, and you're so comically far ahead or literally winning the game that it doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's great against all the Enduring creatures. Yeah. The white one sees play too, so pretty nice. This deck, I kind of remember this deck being pretty good from before. I'm assuming what kept it out of the format were the very aggressive decks that were so good before the bans. So
yeah, aggro has certainly been the killer of this deck, and I think that the Cauldron deck is a little bit tough, but I don't think it's as bad as like Mono Red was.
Do you think other people are going to be playing this deck too, or have you seen? No, it sounds like maybe you've played a little bit more standard than me. What have people been playing? What are the big decks?
I mean, today I played against so much Yuna, which this deck it might be one of the best decks you could play against Yuna, to be honest.
Right, they have. I guess Yuna struggles against combo type decks because they don't have very much interaction.
Yeah. This deck, Consult the Star Charts, has felt pretty nice. I think Stock Up is better, but I want more than 4 of that type of card, so Consult's filling it out nicely for the extra slots.
I think some of the front runners for standard are going to be like the Cauldron deck, Yuna. I've also seen a lot of Yuna in the handful of games I've played, and then I think of the controlling strategies, I think Blue-White Control and Jeskai are pretty obvious for people to pick up and play. Maybe even Esper. Yeah, Esper at least is gonna. It's not obvious how you should build it. Whereas Jeskai and Blue-White, you pretty much just throw in Consult the Star Charts and swap your lockdowns or whatever. Or maybe you play Seam Rip instead, and you still play Day of Judgment, Ultima, all that stuff.
Yeah, I agree. Esper is weird. Where I don't know what black spells I'd play, but I do know I have Godless Shrine and Watery Grave to kind of make it easy if I wanted to play them.
Yeah, it's funny. I can't think of, because normally what you do with your blue-white deck turning it to Esper is you're splashing good black removal, but black doesn't even really have good black removal, so I'm not sure what you would want to do there.
Yeah.
We could talk about one of the decks I drafted up and played a couple of games with. This is blue-black control featuring the combo with Singularity Rupture and Riverturn Monument. So Singularity Rupture from the new set, that's the 3 blue-black-black sorcery. Destroy all creatures, then any number of target players each mill half their library rounded down. So if you cast this, and then on the next turn you play Riverturn Monument and exhaust it, you will mill your opponent's deck, unless they've done something to exile their own graveyard. So it's kind of like a 2-punch combo. That's really nice. And I've got it just in a blue-black control shell. I've got 4 Consult the Star Charts, some stock up, some counter spells. I do have the Dragon synergies here, so I can play with Caustic Exhale and Dispelling Exhale. So I've got Moraine River Regent, Scavenger Regent. I'm trying some Dirger Island Dragons. This is just because I don't really need more sweepers because I already have the 3 Singular Ruptures, and I don't need a lot more Moraine River Regions because I have all the other card drawing spells that I like more. So this is just a way to pad my Dragon count. And obviously the plan here is you just play the Omen to tap something and draw a card and buy some time, which this deck doesn't really have to answer all your opponent's threats. It just has to Wrath and then find a Monument and play that.
Yeah, the weird part is it has to Wrath and maybe have a little bit of coverage. I'm wondering if there's something you could play that gives you some coverage to a potential board state that's already in play. Cauldron sounds really annoying for this deck, given you mill half their deck to kind of enact your game plan, so their Cauldron's going to have whatever they're looking for.
Right. Yeah,
and you're not see that problem with any card in your deck either. So if they just stick a Cauldron in the game, then you're just gonna have to deal with that the whole game.
Mm-hmm. Cauldron, interestingly enough, Cauldron was one of the better matchups for my old blue-black control deck. This one's a little bit different. I don't have the exile removal and whatnot, but I think I do think you can beat that deck by just sort of answering all their threats. They don't produce that many. But yeah, that's something to keep note of. I don't have the Blast Zones anymore. Access to Blast Zone to kill the Cauldron. But I just thought this was a pretty strong synergy that I wanted to try out.
Yeah, and then I see you have Abzan Yuna here too, which I didn't shell a deck out, but it's been on my mind, though I already kind of mentioned. I'm kind of interested in seeing if I can maximize the Black Overlord in this deck, especially with Siege Ship Brood Tender.
Yeah, I could see it. What do you think that deck would look like? It probably wouldn't have the white or green Overlord, right?
It might have the white Overlord, but certainly not the green one. And
yeah,
probably
I guess that
just
makes
the full
sense.
for like Summon Primal Odin. Yeah, I would have to see if there's some other creatures. I mean, the problem is, you want to make sure your creatures are still good.
You can play Summon Fenrir.
Summon Fenrir, yeah. There might be some others. I don't know if you want to go bigger with, like, I guess it's tough because it's not really good to bring back the really expensive enchantment creatures with Overlord. Having them in your hands not very useful. I don't know if there's maybe a weird discard outlet to set up.
Yeah, so Abzan doesn't have as many discard outlets as Naya.
Yeah,
so that's one problem.
No...
I put this card in my deck. I'm going to try it. It's called Wrinkle's Prank. I've got 2 of them. It's a sorcery. It says choose 1 or more. Each player discards 2 cards. Each player loses 4 life, and each player sacrifices 2 creatures, and you get to choose how many of those you do. I have no idea if this is good. I'm looking for something to discard my Esper Origins and maybe something expensive, and in theory this seems okay. You can play it on turn 4. Maybe you do a bit of a Wrath type of thing, and then, if your opponent is discarding 2 real cards and you're discarding like an Esper Origins and one of your big enchantments, that might be good. So that's the theory there. Otherwise, I basically just took my Abzan Yuna deck from the last format. I added Godless Shrine. I added a couple Seam Rips. I added Siege Ship Brood Tender, which is the black-green 2/3. When he enters, you mill 3 cards. And then he has 3 black-green. You sacrifice him, you return a creature or spacecraft from your graveyard to the battlefield. So this card's a pretty nice fit with the deck. I mean, even as simple as you could, in theory, play it on turn 2, mill 3 cards. If you mill a big creature, then on turn 3 you can ramp with either Summon Fenrir or Overlord, Green Overlord, which are both in this deck. And then turn 4 you could sacrifice it and bring a big creature back.
Yeah, and I guess, thinking about it more, with more ways to reanimate a big creature, maybe something like Summon Knights of the Round could be more fitting here.
Yeah, I wondered if maybe I should have a couple Summon Knights of the Round, and you could also play the card you mentioned. I can't think of the name. Bitter Triumph, is that what it's called?
Yep.
Yeah,
I guess that's probably the black discard outlet I'm thinking I'd want.
Yeah, so I thought about, you could do that.
Yeah.
That might be interesting. But my experience with Summon Knights around in the last format wasn't great because I felt like Overlord of the Mistmores was sometimes even just better, and obviously since it's less mana, it can be played on turn 4 is pretty good. And if you're playing Green Overlord and White Overlord, then you get to play Cavernous Souls and have that kind of be a reliable thing to name horror with.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But yeah, there's lots of different routes to go for something like this, of course. And I haven't toyed around with Naya yet, and you could obviously play Naya Yuna. Although I haven't been super impressed with the Naya Yuna decks that people play against me. So I don't know.
Naya has this weird problem, and I noticed a bunch today, where my opponents are playing these Fear of Missing Outs, which it makes sense that they play them because it looks like exactly what you'd want. And they're even getting Delirium really early against me with them. And then they just get me to 8 life, and it didn't matter.
Yeah, it's just not a card that fits with the strategy of their deck.
It's just like a card that attacks me for 4, which is pretty cool for a 2-drop, but that's not what your deck's trying to do.
Right, yeah. In my Naya deck in the last format, I had Bitter Reunion, which rotated, and that was a much better fit because you could give your Overlords and things you brought back haste. But yeah, they definitely have a puzzle to solve. I played against someone who maybe was taking the deck in a better direction, where they had Llanowar Elves, and
that was coming to my mind as well.
Yeah, they had Summon Titan, I think. I don't know if that's good, but they had a faster, more proactive version. Naya does have the benefit of getting 2 shock lands, so Llanowar Elves sounds pretty plausible to me. In that deck, you've got Stomping Ground, you can play Starting Town, some of the Verges to play it on turn 1. So yeah, there's some first drafts of the format. I did have a listener question from a local, and they asked me, I'm paraphrasing, but they said roughly what's going to be a good deck that he can build, which isn't too expensive and will probably stay good for a while. Do you have an answer for this?
Well, it's tough because there's sort of a weird dynamic where I kind of expect that this Cauldron VV core will probably be good for a year, but that deck doesn't really qualify as not being expensive now. But if you think of it as like a long-term investment, then like I think you just wouldn't be that wrong. But it's really hard to know this early. I know that the Landfall deck, Bristly Bill is getting more expensive every day, but a lot of that deck is very cheap, but it's just got like these few mythic rares that are a bit more pricey.
Is Bristly Bill expensive?
Yeah, I think it's, last I checked, it was $30, and I think it's more expensive now.
Wow, and Cauldron, is that expensive too?
Yeah, Agathis Soul Cauldron I think is over $30. Here, let's.
Yeah.
Agathis Soul Cauldron is $60.
Whew.
I mean, it's like a multi-format card, and now that it was like $30 before it became a standard deck. Bristly Bill is, I see $30. So
gotcha. I mean, if you're building mono green, you're saving a lot of money because you're not buying dual lands.
Yeah, and then I'll add, my splashes in these mono green decks have felt free, but also not super important. But I guess I would still kind of advocate like getting the Hushwood Verges is really the only dual land I even play in that deck. I just play Hushwood Verges and the Plains to tutor up with all these land tutor cards, and then the Plains can even be on the sideboard, and then just have like Get Losts and Rest in Pieces. They just seem better than your mono green options mostly.
Yeah, and that's also kind of interesting. You could build like the mono green shell, and then over time, as the format changes, you could acquire cards to splash whatever color you think is right, or when cards come out.
A really weird card that came to mind for me in this deck recently that I thought might be good is Emberheart Challenger, which.
Okay, Emberheart Challenger is the mouse, right?
That with Valiant to exile your top card and be able to play it. That deck just has a lot of ways to target things, and I just think Emberheart Challenger and Innkeeper's Talent are really good friends. I think you don't have to be a full-on mouse deck with Manifold Mouse. I think Emberheart Challenger is a card that I think might see some play. That it's a little bit attached to the mouse deck right now, and I don't think that has to be the case.
Yeah, it's funny. I had thought maybe blue-red, like not even necessarily Cauldron, but I thought blue-red VV might be a decent deck to build, because the thing with VV is I know it's expensive, but it's a super good card, so it's almost certainly going to see play for a while.
Yep.
And I also think it's uniquely a card that if it were to get banned or rotate or not be good anymore, it would probably still be a pretty expensive card.
Yeah, and then I just wanted to add to that, so Shivan Reef's gone. We're not getting Steam Vents. People are looking at Starting Town. So that deck has this unique property where Watery Grave got printed, and the blue-black Verge is blue first. In combination with Breeding Pool got printed, and the blue-green Verge is blue first. So I think, like, if you build a blue-red Prowess deck specifically, keep in mind that I think a green or black kind of light splash could really be available to you here. One card that comes to mind if you're a more Prowess aggro deck, which is funny because I registered this at a card at a Pro Tour, one of two people I think, is Elusive Otter, which is the 1-mana 1/1 Prowess Otter from Wilds of Eldraine with creatures with power less than it can't block it, and it has the adventure that is green X, distribute X, +1/+1 counters among any number of target creatures you control, sorcery. This is a 1-mana Prowess threat, kind of similar to Swiftspear in that it, if you're playing green mana, it's nice because when you draw it later in the game, it still triggers Prowess for the rest of your deck.
Okay. Yeah,
it's like a non-creature spell built in. Like it's awkward because I guess Fire Magic is kind of a 1 toughness Punisher, but this card has Prowess, so it's a little harder. In the world where there's not 1 toughness Punishers, I think this card, for example, like stronger than Soulscar Mage, which is a card that's like seen some modern play. It's hard to block. Yeah, it's pretty potent 1-drop, and it's nice that when you top deck it, it's actually a pretty powerful spell. I've played with this card a lot, and I'll also say you can play the green part for 0 with no targets. That's a legal play. So, you can just tack a green onto it to trigger Prowess on all your things if you wanted, and you don't want to be committal and target. Because if you target your creature and they kill it in response, then you won't get it in adventure.
Yeah, that sounds pretty good. Boy, it'd be interesting to see like a blue-green or blue-black or Grixis.
Yeah,
I guess, prowess deck.
yeah. I mean, I guess almost exactly what I'm talking about here is you build your blue-eyed prowess deck, and you have some green sources in it, and your deck just has Elusive Otter and Questing Druid and like sideboard disenchants. That's kind of what I have in mind here. Because Questing Druid, the red half is really what you want, and Elusive Otter, like the blue half, is really what you want. So it's not really like going against. You don't need a green source for these cards to operate correctly. And it's funny that I mentioned that because I did play what I'm describing at a Pro Tour before Steel Cutter or even Storm Chaser's Talent were cards.
Oh, funny. Yeah, that all sounds pretty nice. My thought with that was like maybe you're not, you can't expect if you're only going to build one deck for the format and kind of ride it. Of course, you wouldn't expect your deck to be tier 1, but I feel like of that prowess shell is going to be pretty consistently like a tier 2 type of strategy.
Yeah.
It's got a nice base to it with stock up and VV and cheap blue and red interaction and all that.
Yeah, you had mentioned earlier too, the red core, what do you use to answer bigger creatures? And I mean, Into the Floodmaw is one of the better ways to...
Yeah, there you go. Into the Floodmaw backed up with some pressure.
To punish your opponent trying to play big, high toughness creatures to be good against your red cards. It kind of plays perfectly.
Right. The only other deck I thought of was like, and I know this isn't for everyone, but I think blue-white control has been like a pretty decent tier 2 option for a while, and it looks like it's kept its important cards and is getting new toys. So I bet blue-white control will probably be good for a while too.
Yeah.
There's some options for that. Anything else, Jacob, that you can think of you want to cover today?
I had a small thought about 2 mana, like 3 toughness creatures sounding kind of good to be playing right now because, even Torch the Tower can deal 3. I think there might be, it might be kind of difficult for decks to answer those efficiently. And,
yeah, especially early, right? You're not going to be sacking something Torch the Tower on turns 2 or 3, presumably.
So a lot of those see play right now are like, Fear of Missing Out's the big one. You have the Brood Tender in your deck.
Voice of Victory comes to mind.
Yeah, so that's the one I wanted to mention. That card seems like one of the better 2-drops in Standard to me that's kind of really looking for a home. I built a Boros deck that kind of mimics the mono-white deck of last format, but is just splashing red because it's kind of free for like a Braid or potentially Torch the Tower, which you can do the same trick with your Enduring Innocence that I had mentioned before, where you can kind of just sack it. And that's just a few more instants compared to the full Laydown's Arm thing that happened before. That deck doesn't really lose much at all. You lost Laydown Arms, like I said, but you're getting Seam Rip and you're getting the ability to either splash red or black. And that deck's a pretty cool Voice of Victory deck. Voice of Victory, that text of players can't cast spells on your turn sounds like it's a purely kind of anti-counter magic thing, but there's a little bit more to it than that. And it's that if your opponent passes with, let's say, Lightning Helix on turn 2, and you play Voice of Victory, you kind of just eat their mana. It's effectively hexproof on your turn is what that card reads to some extent. So, that can be a big deal.
Yeah, it's a very strong card.
It's a lot. That text has really only existed on cards that are pretty bad and not worth playing. But Voice of Victory has a pretty good text box otherwise. It's a pretty powerful and unique thing where in the tokens deck, you care about making tokens, or if you were playing an aggro deck, it attacks for 3, or if you have an Anthem or something, it attacks for a lot more. I want to include it in my decks that have the station, because that's like 6 power in 1 card if all your creatures get +1/+1. And yeah, it's just, it's a lot better than it reads, I think. There's also just weird things sometimes you want to do on your turn. It's nice to know that you're not going to get blown out if you untap this with this. Even in Modern, it's a card that's in seeing play because it makes red permanents and it's good with Goblin Bombardment, but the deck it sees plays and sometimes wants to legend rule its own Ajani to flip Ajani, and that's a play that's kind of terrible if your opponent has removal, but when you have Voice of Victory, that wouldn't happen.
Yeah, so I've seen people play it with Sephiroth. It's a pretty good effect.
Yeah,
I've seen people play with, of course, the white Enduring Creature. And then also it's kind of good with the blue Enduring Creature too. I don't really know what your deck's going to look like if you do that, but just, that's 3 bodies coming in. If you hit them all, you draw 3 cards. So
that makes sense. And that if you start your turn of Voice of Victory on an empty board, that'll work.
That it's going to work. Yeah. So really good card for sure. I think we're going to be seeing a lot of that one going forward. Okay, well, that'll do it for today's episode for Standard's new Edge for Edge of Eternity. We hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you next time.
All right, I see on your notes you wrote sign off possums.
Yep. You got a possum story. Didn't expect this. It happened last night. So I'll give you guys a little bit of background. I recently moved in this new house in Washington, and there was this stray cat that lives around, and the neighbors used to take care of it, and then the neighbors moved out, and they brought me the stray's treat bag, and so I gave the stray some treats, and now the stray has like adopted us. It just lives on our porch, essentially, or around the neighborhood. I have a feeling it's probably been here for a long time. So okay, so you can see where this is going. I've been leaving out cat food for the stray, and then one night I walked out, and my cats were growling. Like, my kitten was growling. I've never heard my kitten growl. And there was a big raccoon out there just washing he washed his little hands in the cat water bowl as I watched him, and then he ate the cat food. And so I chased him off, and I was like, man, I brought the cat food in. And then last night, so I have been bringing the cat food in when it gets dark. Last time I forgot, and I go out there at like 11 p.m. to get the cat food, and there's this pair of possums just looking at me. One of them had its face in the cat food, and I got so mad. I just yelled at him and chased him off and took the food inside. And when I told Kelly this story today, she was like, I don't know why you hate the possums any more than the stray cat. It's also just this thing that comes and what you're feeding it. Like, what did the possums do wrong? I was like, well, I guess that's kind of a good point, but I don't know. They're ugly. And I could pet the cat, and the cat's nice to me. And I've nicknamed her Pudge because she's got this little fat belly from maybe she had a litter or something. I don't know. So yeah, possums and raccoons and cats are fighting for cat food on my porch these days.